population exceeding 1.3 billion, continued economic growth, and a large supply of inexpensive and productive labor, China lures businesses from around the world. Despite criticism of its unwieldy bureaucracy or lack of disclosure of corporate accounting practices and governance, most global companies agree that you can't be globally successful if you ignore this emerging market. It's clear that the Chinese business landscape is changing. As economic and political reforms continue, China is charging ahead in its efforts to become one of the key global economies. At the same time, companies looking to do business in China need to keep in mind the impact of its long and complex history, as well as its rich cultural traditions, all of which continue to exert a strong influence on virtually every aspect of Chinese life, including how business is conducted. The key to doing business in China is flexibility, patience, and persistence, much as you'd need in most emerging markets, but with a few unique twists. Companies considering doing business with China have to first determine the best way to enter the market. Most foreign firms utilize some form of collaborative arrangement with local firms when entering China. In this segment, we will talk about how companies can enter the Chinese market, the various factors they need to consider if they enter into a collaborative arrangement, and
it's okay, these are some of the key points, but you need to take note of as we go along.
some of the tactical steps they need to take in the early stages of their Chinese operations. There are 4 key ways to enter the Chinese market: exporting to China, licensing, including franchising,
Last week,
equity joint ventures, wholly owned foreign enterprises, WOFEs, or WOFEs. These are not mutually exclusive ways to enter. It's clear for those experienced in dealing with China that there isn't one best way to enter China. Companies have to consider a number of financial, operational, and resource factors. For example, some companies start by considering how much control they wish to retain, while for others, the primary concern is how much of their own resources they're willing to commit. As companies develop more experience doing business with China, they're likely to reassess the way they do business in the country, particularly in terms of collaborative arrangements. Companies that aim to have a stronger and more profitable presence in the Chinese market need to increase their commitment of resources. Exporting may be effective, especially for smaller and mid-sized companies that can't or won't make any significant financial investment in the Chinese market. Companies can sell into China either through a local distributor or through their own salespeople. Many government export trade offices can help a company find a local Chinese distributor or producer. Increasingly, the Internet has provided a more efficient way for foreign and Chinese companies to find one another and enter into commercial transactions. Using distributors can have its own challenges. For example, some companies find that if they have a dedicated salesperson who travels frequently to China, they're likely to get more sales than by relying on a China-based distributor. Often, Chinese distributors sell multiple products and sometimes even competing ones. Making sure that the Chinese distributor favors your product over another can be hard to monitor. Further, some companies often find that culturally, Chinese consumers may be more likely to buy a product from a foreign company than from a local distributor, particularly in the case of a complicated, high-tech product. Simply, the Chinese are more likely to trust that the overseas salesperson knows their product better. There are risks with relying on the export option. If you merely export to China, the Chinese distributor or buyer might switch purchases to a cheaper supplier or even just threaten to in order to get a better price from you. Or someone might start making the product within China and take the market from you. Also, local Chinese buyers sometimes believe that a company which only exports to them is not very committed to providing long-term service and support once a sale is complete. Thus, they may...
Okay, so the risks associated with export, remember, unreliable distributor, right? Then they are not willing to commit to long-term service support, right? And also they switch to a cheaper supplier. just take
for to buy from someone who is producing within China. At this point, many companies begin to consider having a local presence, which moves them towards one of the other three entry options. Under a licensing or franchising agreement, a foreign company grants rights on its intangible property, like technology or a brand name, to a Chinese company for a specific period of time. In return, it receives a royalty. The Chinese sometimes call this a contractual joint venture. While the foreign company usually has no ownership interests, they often provide ongoing support and advice. Most companies still consider this market entry option of licensing and franchising a low-risk option because there's typically no upfront investment. However, foreign companies are sometimes concerned about protecting their intellectual property. In fact, until 1992, any technology that was part of a joint venture could be accessed by a local Chinese company through a government agency. Though today there's still concern over the protection of intellectual property, China's inclusion in the World Trade Organization has encouraged the government to focus attention on how best to protect property rights for everything, from software, videos, and DVDs, to brand names for consumer products.
So what was highlighted in particular will be intellectual property rights, right? Licensing, especially.
The next option for companies entering China is some form of equity joint venture. In the past, joint ventures were the only relationship foreign companies could form with Chinese companies. In fact, prior to 1986, foreign companies could not wholly own a local subsidiary. The Chinese government began to allow equity joint ventures only since 1979, which marked the beginning of the open door policy, an economic liberalization initiative. The Chinese government strongly encouraged equity joint ventures as a great way to gain access to the technology, capital, equipment, and know-how of foreign companies. The risk to the foreign company was that if the venture soured, the Chinese company could end up keeping all of these assets. Often, Chinese companies only contributed things like land or tax concessions that foreign companies couldn't keep if the venture ended.
So take note, when you go to China, or sometimes Indonesia or India, the main thing they provide a joint venture is land, some building, existing building, as part of their contribution to the joint venture. Right? But you've heard that if the deal goes sour, whatever, especially technology know-how and the way to do things, it might be copied and duplicated. Right? So this is JV the major reason.
Equity joint ventures pose both opportunities and challenges for the companies that choose this option. First and foremost is the challenge of finding the right Chinese partner, not just in terms of business focus, but also in terms of compatible cultural perspectives and management practices. We'll talk more about these kinds of factors companies need to consider later.
Okay, so key point, you must have very good local partner, right? Not just their network, you must have a same management orientation, right? The same objective in terms of whether let's say the company is focused on building the company long-term, brand building instead of short-term gain, then the local partners also must have the same kind of thing, right? So you choose a company that is too local and you don't understand international standard and practices, you also will have problem interacting with them later on. Okay, so this is the last part, the wholly owned foreign enterprise.
The last entry option requires the highest commitment by the foreign company, which also must assume all of the risk, financial and otherwise. In 1986, the government began to permit wholly owned foreign enterprises, WOFEs, sometimes called WOFEs, as an alternative to joint ventures. Even then, the government banned wholly owned enterprises that were either strategic, like utilities or transportation, or were in industries where Chinese companies already had sufficient capabilities, like production of blue porcelain. The government also traditionally required WOFEs to be high-tech companies that export at least 50% of their production.
Okay, so this one is key. Last time they allow you to set up your own, only own, 100% own. If you are high-tech company like Ericsson, Nokia, Intel, right? But they don't encourage another group to do porcelain or those low-end products come in and set up the only own. Okay, so they are very selective. Okay, so they allow only own, but make sure that you are really the high-tech product.
In reality, this rule has not always been uniformly enforced. Some foreign companies believe that owning their own operations in China is an easier option than having to deal with a Chinese partner. For example, many foreign companies still fear that their Chinese partners will learn too much from them and become competitors.
This is the part about joint venture. They are afraid that they learn too much.
However, in most cases, the Chinese partner knows the local culture, both that of the customers and workers, and is better equipped to deal with Chinese bureaucracy and regulations. Additionally, even WOFIs cannot be totally independent of Chinese firms, who they might have to rely on for raw materials and shipping, as well as maintenance of government contracts and distribution channels. Collaborations offer different kinds of opportunities and challenges than self-handling Chinese operations. For most companies, the local nuances of the Chinese market make some form of collaboration desirable. The companies that opt to self-handle their Chinese operations tend to be very large and/or have a proprietary technology base, such as companies in high-tech or aerospace, for example, Boeing or Microsoft. Even then, these companies tend to hire senior Chinese managers and consultants to facilitate their market entry, and then help manage their expansion. Nevertheless, navigating the local Chinese bureaucracy is tough, even for the most experienced companies. Just about any large venture in China will at some point come into contact with the Ministry of Foreign Trade and Economic Development. China has a vast bureaucracy, although it is being revamped, and a maze of government agencies and regulations. Many foreign companies choose to enter China via Hong Kong. They may set up a Hong Kong company or use a Hong Kong-based Chinese company as a partner. For decades, this was the only legally permitted option as the Chinese government strictly controlled access to its local markets. Even with China's liberalization, many companies continue to enter via Hong Kong because Hong Kong places very few restrictions and red tape on foreign investment, is well regulated, offers operating efficiencies, and has transparent operating rules and regulations. However, the handover of Hong Kong to China on July 1, 1997 has weakened some of these attributes. Entering through Hong Kong does have its problems. These days, some mainland Chinese, especially those from Beijing, complain that Hong Kong Chinese have taken advantage of them, and thus are reluctant to deal with them. In such cases, foreign companies are better off choosing a different way to enter the Chinese market. Further, most people in China speak Mandarin, which is not the primary language in Hong Kong, but over 400 million speak one of the other 7 dialects, such as Cantonese, which is the main language in Hong Kong and is commonly spoken throughout the southern part of China. Regardless of which entry strategy a company chooses, several factors are always important.
So, just to add on, for most companies, they go through Hong Kong, especially the manufacturing side. You all remember people like Nokia, people like Apple, who use Foxconn to produce all their iPad, iPhone. They are using Hong Kong, or they go direct to Guangzhou, all right? Why? Because for the whole of China, my understanding is that the northern part of China, they are not as skillful when it comes to doing your Columbia or your North Face or Nike, all the winter jacket or clothing. Okay, most of them are done in Guangzhou. All right, toys, clothes, jeans, T-shirt, winter wear, everything is done in Guangzhou. A lot in Guangzhou, Shenzhen. All right, so that's why a lot of people set out their headquarters or what in Hong Kong. Easier because when you deal with a Hong Konger, they can understand English, and then for the expatriate, the lifestyle is better than staying in Guangzhou or in China in terms of food, water, education for the kids. Right? Okay. So we'll continue from here. Some of the issues.
Cultural and linguistic differences. These affect all relationships and interactions inside the company, with customers and with the government. Understanding the local business culture is critical to success. Quality and training of...
So that's all there is the first one. When you are operating in China, the first one is cultural linguistic. So Hong Kong, Cantonese is different from Mandarin. So not all Chinese are alike, as they say. Okay. So if you're operating in Beijing, it's quite different from your operating even in Guangzhou. The people, the style, the culture is slightly different. Even though all are Chinese, look at them. No. Northern Chinese is different from Southern Chinese. Second one is quality and training of local context. In case those of you just came in, this is an important video that you do some question in that.
Local contacts and/or employees. Evaluating the skill sets and determining if the local staff is qualified is a key factor for success. Political and economic issues. Policy can change frequently, and companies need to determine what level of investment they are willing to make, what is required to make this investment, and how much of the earnings they can repatriate.
Okay, so what do you mean by how much of the earning that you can repatriate? Because renminbi is a controlled currency. Alright, doesn't mean that you can easily bring out renminbi or bring in US dollar. You always have to convert. And most time in the early days, when you make money in China, renminbi, you have to plow back your renminbi into the system to reinvest and to build more factory or whatever. Yeah, the only way to get your money, your profit out is you pay off your tax and you have to declare what you brought in, and then of course you can remit some of them. But in the early days, a lot of us, when we bring in money and then we convert, then renminbi you cannot easily bring out. So some people actually bring renminbi. Last time, they just take through a lot of money and then they just check out, go through the custom. But nowadays, of course, they go through the tax, they pay their tax, and then they duly declare, and then they can still remit their profit back, exchange it back to US dollar. And this whole thing is to control the exchange rate for the renminbi.
Experience of the partner company. Assessing the experience of the Chinese company in the market with the product and in dealing with foreign companies is essential in selecting the right local partner. One of the most important cultural factors in China is guanxi, which is loosely defined as a connection based on reciprocity. Even when just meeting a new company or partner, it's best to have an introduction from a common business partner, vendor, or supplier, someone the Chinese will respect. China is a relationship-based society. Relationships extend well beyond the personal side and can drive business as well. This stands in sharp contrast to the West.
Okay, so for us, when we are there, it's quite common to have building relationship over dinner, alright? So all these table, when we go, you will realize that next time when you go to China, they will be piled with a lot of dishes. We call it appetizer, initial, all the xiao cai, small dishes, and then of course they will have main dish coming out. So they give you a lot of dishes to sample and to show that they are very generous, alright? So this is a room. Normally the boss will be sitting here, the expatriate company, and then next to it will be the GM of the partner of the local company or your business associate, alright? So they will filter down, so there's a sitting arrangement. So you cannot come in and sit wherever you like. Okay, so normally we have an unspoken sitting arrangement when you're having dinner, so that to facilitate discussion, and then maybe you have an interpreter to help you. if you don't like certain thing, let's say the duck tongue, or the duck gizzard, the intestine, all this you don't like, you just take a little bit, and or you don't take, it's alright, okay, but don't make silly comments or laugh or whatever. Right? So these are all basic business etiquette and respect for the other culture.
Where relationships have less importance. With guanxi, a person invests with relationships, much like one would invest with capital. In a sense, it's akin to the Western phrase, you owe me one. Guanxi can potentially be beneficial or harmful. At its best, it can help foster strong, harmonious relationships with corporate and government contact. At its worst, it can encourage bribery and corruption. Whatever the case, companies without guanxi won't accomplish much in the Chinese market. Many companies address this need for guanxi by entering into the Chinese market in a collaborative arrangement with a local Chinese company. This entry option has also been a useful way to circumvent regulations governing bribery and corruption, but it can raise ethical questions, particularly for American and Western companies, which have a different cultural perspective of gift-giving and bribery. Once a meeting has been set up, foreign companies need to understand the local cultural nuances which govern first meetings, physical and verbal gestures, to seating orders. Selecting an entry strategy for China is easier said than done. We've covered the structural options as well as some of the issues that foreign companies need to consider when they decide to enter the Chinese market. Overall, foreign companies need to research the Chinese market thoroughly and learn about the country and its culture. Understand the unique business and regulatory relationships that impact their industry, whether it's consumer products or mining and forestry.
The first point is universal. When you remember, you need to do the research, EST, the political situation, the economic situation. Regulatory relationship. Just now if you read the initial part, there's a MOFTEC, Ministry of Trade and Industry in China. There's a lot of regulation doing business in China, a lot of bureaucracy, remember? So to navigate through all this bureaucracy and to understand all this regulatory relationship is quite key for any company, big or small, venturing into China. Right? So it affects all areas. There are different industries that will take care of. There are different departments that will take care of different industries. And when you research into Chinese market, if you remember the earlier video, they mentioned that you can go through the website, Google the website, see which are your country. Like for example, Singapore, we have a China-Singapore Trade Association that will help you to go into China. All right, so you can make use of all these resources and do all your research before going there.
Use the internet to identify and communicate with appropriate foreign trade corporations in China, or their own government's embassy in China. Each embassy has its own trade and commercial desk. For example,
in Singapore is IE. Remember IE Singapore, they have offices in China, Abu Dhabi, okay, all the main, even Russia.
The U.S. Embassy has a foreign commercial service desk and officer who assists American companies on how best to enter the local market. These resources are best for smaller companies. Larger companies who have more money and resources usually hire top consultants to do this for them.
Okay, take note of this. So small company, you do your own research. The Japanese company, what they do is, before they go into China, they set up an office. They have either 1 or 2 staff Japanese there, stay there and live with them and then do all the research and keep sending out reports, but they don't do anything. So people like the big corporation, they will send the front line, send someone to write report back every month and every week, what are the consumer like, dislike. So the actual employee is doing the research. Okay, stay there, all this, instead of relying on outside consultant. But the bigger firm, they come through, let's say for Richard Ellis, they come in, they will ask us to, commission us to do the report. What's the real estate industry like in Beijing or whatever, or China, which part of China. Okay, so we will do all the report, and each report could cost anything from 200,000 RMB to $500,000 RMB. So that's how the consultant make the money, either from real estate, or there's the 4 management firms, Ernst & Young, KPMG, all this. They have a division within all these four major management consultancy firms they will provide. So oil industry will go to them, then KPMG, Ernst & Young or whatever, they will do a report for you, but they will charge you accordingly, right? So the bigger firm, they got money, they can invest and get the big four to provide the report for them, right?
They're also able to have a dedicated team assigned to China who can travel there frequently in the beginning of the relationship to meet with government representatives. Once a company has decided to enter the Chinese market, it needs to spend some time to understand the local business culture and how to operate within it. China joined the World Trade Organization in December 2001, and it's clear that it will be drawn even more into the global economy as companies continue to vie for access to its 1.3 billion consumers and cheap and productive labor pool. Most companies expect that dealing with China will now become more straightforward, if not easier. Whatever the future brings, the Chinese economy continues to be a powerhouse of growth and opportunity. In this video segment on entry modes into the Chinese market, you've learned the following.